Welcome, everyone. I'm very happy to moderate this discussion here today on the emergency gas measures. And we've already had a policy debate on that. We already have colleagues that contributed also with policy briefs on this topic. But today we invited an academic panel to see where we are with the academic studies on this topic. And of course, there is still limited academic work because everything happens so fast. But I think we have a nice panel here to already get a flavor of what is out there in terms of analysis, and also to what extent we agree on where more research is needed. Because a few months ago, I was very happy to discover that we had a new senior researcher at FSR, Marcia. She joined our gas area. And then also she told me, I did a PhD at Imperial on a topic that I think is quite relevant today. And the PhD was on low frequency, high impact events in the gas system. So she already was simulating what could happen during a gas crisis before it actually happened. So then we started discussing, okay, what is next in this kind of academic research. So she will guide the discussion today here, and she will also indicate, some of the questions we have, and I will see if we already get some answers on or where we will do some additional work. Then I will also already introduce the other panelists. So very happy to have here also ANUK with us. She's a senior research fellow at the Oxford Institute of Energy Studies, and I think she knows Marcia very well because Marcia was also a visitor at that institute. Then we also have with us Francisca. I think we know each other already for a very long time. She was doing a PhD more or less at the same time as me. And already then she was one of the few international gas experts in the field. So she's still working on gas, but now she has a much broader responsibility as a deputy head of department at the DIW in Berlin. And she's also an adjunct professor at the Trondheim University in Norway. So very happy to have you also with us, Francisca. Then we have Oliver. Oliver was already a visitor at FSR. Now he's a postdoc at Hertie, and he wrote a nice academic paper that we will also refer to in this event. So it's good to have him here and just to present his own work. Great. So that was it from my side. And now I just hand over to Marcia to guide the discussion. There are 3 subtopics, so we will more or less divide the time equally between these topics. That also means that participants can ask questions already from the beginning. If they relate to one of the topics we're discussing, I will pick them up during the seminar. If not, we will park them to the end. So don't hesitate to interact with us. Everything is recorded, so we also know that many people cannot necessarily join live, but they will then be able to look at it afterwards. Marcia, go ahead.
Thank you, Leonardo. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Let me know if you can see it, but I
yes.
can. Perfect. So this, as you said, is what we're going to be discussing today. So experience with emergency gas measure, the price cap, the storage regulation, and the saving regulation. And we are going to be going in depth in each of those. But first, let's see a little background on the crisis. So what we had experienced is a crisis on top of a crisis. We were already coming from a slight crisis in winter 21-22 with a market that was tight due to many factors. So renewables weren't delivering as expected. So we had in the second quarter of 2021, we had low wind, we had a lot of problems with hydro, and we had a 10-year low level of gas in storage. Coming from that, the crisis from the invasion of Ukraine was added, and that affected both prices, which kept increasing, and then as a consequence of that, demand was affected in the sense that demand decreased. So here in the slide, we see both the spot and forward natural prices from 2020 to 2023. And you can see that they are basically spiking towards the second quarter of 2022. But also we see this reflected in demand, where you can see already in quarter 1 and 2 of 2021 a very high power demand for gas, probably due to what I mentioned, the drought and the wind. So there was more electricity production from gas. And then we saw like a decrease in 2022. You see in the fourth quarter, there was a reduction, especially for the industry and residential, but also for the power. Following the crisis, the European Commission put forward several emergency measures, both on the supply and on the demand side, and we are going to discuss the three that are that have more directly affected, or they are more directly related to natural gas. The first one, we're not going to discuss them in chronological order, but this is how they were introduced. So the first one was in June of 2022, the storage regulation. Then we had the demand reduction regulation in August of 2022. And then we have the market correction mechanism in December 2022. So as you can see, some of them have already an expiration date, let's call it that way, but also some other have been proposed to be prolonged, and we are going to be talking about that a bit more. So let's focus on Regulation 2578 of 2022. That is the regulation on market correction mechanism that includes price cap. So this market correction mechanism applies to the TTF gas price and is activated only if certain conditions are met. So the month-ahead price of the TTF exceeds 180 euro megawatt hours for 3 consecutive working days. And then the month-ahead TTF price is 35 euro higher than a reference price for LNG on global market. So this reference price is the daily average price of LNG for Europe and Asia, and includes also the front month NBP derivatives settlement price, and this should be the month ahead TTF price should be higher for the same 3 days as the other price that I just mentioned. So if this happens, then Acer is tasked with starting and stopping this mechanism of the bidding limit. So there is a dynamic bidding limit that is introduced. So while the mechanism is active, the transaction that concern natural gas that are within the scope of the MCM and are above this dynamic bidding limit will not be allowed to take place. Basically, if it's if the mechanism is activated, you are not allowed to trade at higher prices than those indicated, and you have to submit bids that are lower. The regulation entered into force in February for a period of 1 year, and the MCM applies from February 15. Now this is a little poll that we want to ask the audience about price cap. Or what do you think? Do we like it as it is? So that's answer number 1. Do we want to make it stronger, improve it? Number 2, or shall we totally forget about it, and so drop it for answer number 3. Okay, so this is pretty interesting, I think, right? Leonardo is here smiling and nodding. So
yeah, basically nobody wants to keep it, right?
Exactly. Yes. So let's see what are the views of some academics on the this price cap. These two views are on like the opposite side of the spectrum. On one side, some academics said yes to the cap. On the other side, some academics says no. But what is true is that they always connect the cap to savings. So it is hard to discuss the cap without introducing savings. Natalia Fabra, in her joint letter with other authors, says that the cap ensures that uncertainties of future market do not escalate prices. So this would avoid further damaging the economy. So with lower gas prices, she says, have an additional benefit of reducing cost of the electricity, because still a substantial portion of the electricity is produced with gas. So what she argues with these other authors is that by reducing gas and electricity prices as a consequence, the cap can also help lowering the overall rate of inflation. On the other side, as I mentioned, there are other academics, and in particular, we read Lionheart, who says that if you introduce a cap, you have to introduce hard saving policies. But if you introduce the savings, you don't need the cap anymore. So why not already jump to the savings and skip the cap altogether? Then it would be up to the government to allocate gas across borders.
Great. So then we have 3 more academics here that can tell us. They were not able to answer the poll because I tried to push and I don't think we can. So you can now tell us. We have Francisca that is a bit close to the Karsten, right? One of the 3 authors of that letter. And we have Oliver that is a colleague of Lionheart. And then ANUK is more free to speak where she is on which side. Francisca, you want to start?
Maybe let me start, but I would maybe want to stress that I'm sort of geographically close to Carsten Neuhoff. You're in the same institute, but I don't necessarily agree with the price cap, and we had tough discussions in the institute on that last year. My main criticism goes in the same direction as Leon Hertz, saying, well, we need the savings, so let's do savings policies. And the other criticism, of course, is also that if we start lowering prices, we are not sure to get the gas that we need. And price is a signal, and it's a signal for scarcity. And if gas is scarce, we need that signal to work. And my third criticism would be that we don't really understand that mechanism. And the complexity of what is needed to implement it is also shown if you look at the suggestion by Carsten Neuhoff in detail. His suggestion actually was to implement the price cap on the balancing market, and not directly on the TTF, because nobody has ever done that on a real marketplace. But just explaining that to policymakers was too complicated. Nobody understood what a balancing market is, and it really shows the difficulty. It's far too complex to work in a market. And I think just as a fourth point to add, the fact that we see the London marketplace, the ICE, actually developing an alternative product for gas purchases to be delivered in the European Union, that shows that really it's highly controversial, and it's not going to work. There will be outside exit options to replace sort of the non-functioning TTF in case such a cap is enacted. So I'm happy to see that the audience agrees with that, actually.
Thank you, Francisca. Oliver.
Not much to add on that. I'm pretty much in line with that. Maybe one example. I think the underlying question was that over the summer prices were so high, and is that reflecting reality or was it exaggerated? And as you cited, Natalia Fabra, it was about uncertainties affecting the market. But I think that's something quite natural. I think last summer we did not know how much can we reduce demand, how hard will it be, how fast can we get more LNG or other sources on board. So I think it's hard to tell, but the prices reflected the best knowledge. But still, that's the role of prices to gather information, to reflect that. And I find it hard if single people say, well, it's exaggerated over this large community of traders which build up their mind and put their money on this price. I agree with the technical implementation, but maybe to add one more thing, which I found quite interesting after following what Leon said, but also Natalia Fabra, that the TTF is a very European price. It's used all over Europe, although the scarcity situation partly is quite heterogeneous. So in Spain, I think there was that was not so much of an issue that they would expect like physical scarcity, but still many contracts were tied to the TTF, which was reflecting the scarcity situation in the other whole of Europe. So I think that's something where we should maybe review this and find some technical implementation, some other benchmarks to be used in case there's really different levels of scarcities within Europe.
Thank you, Oliver. ANUK?
Just to follow up, I think I agree with Franziska and with Oliver. The whole discussion around the price cap has been a confusion between the pricing mechanisms and the price levels. We've had a lot of problem with the price levels, and the answer has been to change the price mechanisms. In other words, what we've been trying to do for the past 20 years in Europe, scratch that and try and constrain it. There has been a lot of discussion, including in the reports by ESSER and ESMA that were published at the beginning of March, so beginning of this month, highlighting potential risk. I mean, they haven't said there was discernible problems at the moment because of the price cap, but the prices have been low and the volatility has been low as well. But they do highlight certain numbers of risks in terms of risk of security of supply that has been mentioned already, the market functioning, of course, the transparency and the market monitoring could also be impacted especially if we extend the price cap to other traded markets, derivatives, or even the OTC market. We've seen some response already with the ICE offering the TTF derivatives on its UK platform that will not be subject to the MCM regulation and the related TTF price cap. The development also of the EEX derivatives being offered on its OTF, Organized Trading Facility, that will not be subject to the price cap, unlike the main exchange, for instance. And of course, that raises the issue of liquidity and transparency. Both are direct consequences of the establishment of the regulation and highlight potential existence of routes by the traders to avoid the MCM, and at the end of the day, question the effectiveness of this measure. So I think you have here my views on what I think on trying to cap a wholesale price for gas in Europe.
Thank you, very clear. You at some point on social media, you also saw people saying, this is not a cap, this is a Brussels cap, because it was defined in a way that it has not yet really been binding, no? Yeah, in that sense, we've sort of avoided the trouble. But just in case it would become a binding cap, as both of you said, Franziska and ANUK, it seems to be traders are already anticipating and trying to circumvent, as always happens, right, with this kind of interventions. Okay, we were thinking that this was a good warm-up topic, indeed, and we already covered 20 minutes, so that is a good warm-up. So let's go to the other ones that are a bit more complex, I think, to discuss, because there is several angles to it. So go ahead, Marcia, you can introduce the second emergency measure.
Yes. So the second emergency measure, we are moving on, and we are going to be looking into storage. These are some references on storage. As Leonardo mentioned at the beginning, I have conducted some studies on storage, and they predate the emergency regulation discussion. So the research focused on specific non-market base, which is strategic storage. So a volume that is set aside of the market and that is kept in storage until the government declares a state of emergency, and then this volume can be activated and used. So these are two of the paper that came out of the research, and both of them concentrate on the coordinated use of strategic storage in Europe, and in particular on solidarity among member states, which this is what I defined as solidarity. I looked at 4 scenarios: strategic with and without strategic storage, and with or without the coordinated use of strategic storage. So the use of strategic storage in a coordinated way among member states has been used in the research as a measure for solidarity. What the results said is that solidarity increased the resilience of the system by increasing the number of days in which demand can be met in the early stage of a crisis, and also system costs are reduced for 15% in the first part of the crisis, so in the first week after the crisis starts. So here, in a sense, it shows the value of storage that we now all realize storage has by having experienced it and testing it firsthand during the actual energy crisis. What the Commission came up with is Regulation 132 of 2022. This regulation amends some of the articles of Regulation 138 of 2017 on security of supply, and also of Regulation 715 of 2009. It looks at gas storage and how gas storage contributes to security of supply by absorbing supply shocks and supply disruption. This regulation did not impose strategic storage as I have analyzed it in my work, but it went for something else. And so the idea is that to enhance gas security, by introducing filling targets and trajectories, because in 2021 we have hit a 10-year low levels for filling levels for storage. So these filling targets are at 80% in 2022, so this year, by the start of the storage season, which is November 1st. They have intermediate filling targets, and then from 2023, the filling target is set at 90% by November 1st still. In the implementation of these targets, there are some refilling incentives that the regulation has introduced with the storage filling agents. For instance, the Dutch government is going to assume part of the price risk, reimbursing the difference between the current gas price and the gas price next winter, because these filling agents can receive public money. So can buy, the agent can buy on behalf of someone else, like for instance, the state, and then the money is then recovered. So to the extent that the player, based on maybe commercial reasons, don't do the filling, then there is the role of these storage filling agents to step in and subsidize the fillings. Then the regulation introduced also a certification that is compulsory for all underground gas storage operators. Meaning that non-certified operators will have to give up the ownership and the control of the EU gas storage facility. So this will actually avoid the risk resulting from third country influence over infrastructure that are critical. And then lastly, what the regulation introduced is the burden sharing with neighboring countries to ensure that those member states that do not have storage store at least 50% of their annual gas consumption in member states that do have storage, unless there are some technical limitation. For instance, there are no connections between the states. And then at that point, other burden sharing mechanism could be agreed on a bilateral basis, based on technical limitation and so forth, so on. So again, here is the same poll that we presented before, but on the storage regulation that we just heard about. So should we keep it as it is? Should it be improved, or we should just drop it? Okay, so this is actually the opposite. As for the price cap, people are less skeptical, right, about the value of this measure. 60% is a really good percentage. So there hasn't been many academic literature that investigate the new regulation. So here what we are proposing are some questions that we are asking ourselves and that we are trying to seek an answer to. So the first one is, did the storage filling obligation lead to the price spike? So in a sense, like the cost benefit of this obligation. So probably the answer is no, but maybe, we can discuss about this. And then the second question that we are asking ourselves is, if we have a storage filling agent using public money to fill the storage, should that storage be treated as a strategic storage, or that we keep in reserve? So keep it there or use it commercially? That is actually like the underlying question here. And then the last one is on solidarity. So the proposed burden sharing, where are we going with that? So yeah.
Thank you, Marcia. Or are we even, asking the right questions, right? So
yes,
beyond these three, also the 30% that answered improve it. It would be really nice to see in the chat or in the Q&A what kind of improvements you have in mind as audience. But we can also do the tour of our experts here. And I'm happy we have representatives from Germany, because this really played out quite significantly. So I don't know, Franziska, do you want to start to tell us a bit what the Germans currently think about this?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, storage in Germany plays a large role. We have the largest storage capacities in Europe. We have almost a quarter, more than a quarter of our consumption storage capacities, but it's less than the 50% that you mentioned for the burden sharing mechanism. So even in the large storage countries, not as much. And storage covers probably something between 2 and 3 winter months if the full capacity were used of the storage. So it's also not sort of the only tool that helps us coming over the winter months. But that's an important contribution, or at least it was sort of providing a lot of mental security to people to know that storage levels were high this winter. So what happened in Germany was that we had some sort of a public agent. So Trading Hub Europe actually in Germany was purchasing gas, and it was purchasing a lot of gas in the summer months when the price spiked, to put that into storage. So in Germany, the sense is that actually this contributed to the increase of the spike. Let's see if you do empirical analysis, if you also find that. I don't have a good answer, but the sense of observers is that it was probably a large contribution. I rather tend to agree to the uncertainty story that says it was uncertainty that increased the prices over the summer. But yeah, I'd be very curious to see the results to your research question. And overall, I find your research questions very relevant. Have always been a bit skeptical of strategic storage in the natural gas sector. I think since we are here relatively limited to geological facilities hosting the storage, which is why Germany has a lot and other countries don't have much. I think it's very difficult to do such a technical target as in the oil sector, where it's actually men-based installations and not anything related to geological facilities. So I think it's very hard, given that we already only have a relatively small fraction of annual demand as storage capacities, to even reduce that capacity further by putting that into something that would be called strategic storage in the oil sector. So that is, if we look at the oil sector experience, the strategic storage wasn't touched for decades. So there wasn't any withdrawal for many, many decades. For decades, we said only when Katrina hit the Gulf Coast, oil was released, and the 20 years before and the 10 years after, there wasn't any release. So if that is the role model, then I think it's really not fit for purpose in the gas sector. But we see there's more flexibility now. There's been a lot of withdrawals from the oil strategic storage in the last 2 years. And maybe that is the model that people have in mind here for the gas sector as well. Let me maybe just leave it here and just say one word about the burden sharing. I think this is very challenging. I already mentioned 50%. I find that too high, but I think it's also important to find some mechanism that addresses the solidarity question. This sort of Germany-only focus doesn't work, and we really need to include other member states in the way we manage our gas, including the storage.
Thank you, Franziska. Oliver, you want to add on that?
Yeah, so I think it's a bit like a public insurance. So yes, now we have bought all this expensive natural gas with taxpayers' money, basically, or money that must be somehow raised from all consumers, whether they like it or not. And now we know that actually this winter the prices aren't so high, the situation isn't so scarce. So I think we still should acknowledge we're better off than we thought. And yes, we paid the premium for this insurance, which was quite high. But I think that's how I think about it now. But still, I'm curious and looking forward to see more empirical work on now what has that caused the price spike, etc.
Maybe the strategic storage question could be rephrased as, if you are in the situation of Germany where you filled your gas storage at very high prices and today prices are very low, should you keep it there in reserve, right, until next summer or not? So I understood from you, Franziska, that you think we should not, keep it. We should just continue the normal seasonal cycle. Is that correct?
I personally would say let's go back to the commercial way of working. But what we see right now is that the commercial activity, with the very low prices that we have now, and also expected for the summer, there's no withdrawal from storage because the price differential goes in the wrong direction, right? Purchase at high prices, put in storage, and why would you release it at low prices? But I think it's okay, since that is sort of the commercial reality. Let's see where prices are next year.
So the reserves are done automatically in a way, purely based on the commercial incentives. Okay, ANUK, I think you can give us a bit of a broader perspective, maybe beyond Germany.
I fully agree with my colleagues, and I really like the mental security and the insurance words that were being mentioned in terms of storage, especially in the situation that we have been over the past few months. Maybe it has contributed to the increase in prices over the last summer month, but having said that, it probably contributed as well to avoid spikes in prices during the winter when we had this cold spell at the beginning of December, in February as well, just to have that insurance, that mental security, as it was mentioned. The storage were full, we were fairly secure, and therefore we didn't see the price spikes that we could have seen over the winter. And let me tell you, it's much better to have a price spike in a bad situation where you have only bad choices. It's better to have a price spike during the summer than during the winter, especially in Europe, when where we rely on gas for about 35% of our heat in residential heating. It goes much higher in certain countries. So choosing the bad of two evils, it probably was better anyway to have the price spike in the summer, to be able to fill the storage and to start the winter, which luckily was very mild, but to have the storage full at the beginning of winter. We're finishing the winter with about 55 or well over 50% of our storage is full. So the situation over the next few months is going to be slightly different to what we've seen last year. We don't need to refill as quickly, or we don't need to refill as much as last year when we finished the winter with about a quarter of the storage full. So it's going to be interesting whether we still need the storage regulation. I do not know. I would have voted, if I have been able to keep as it is, or maybe improve it, but not drop it. I think it's an insurance. It's a sort of insurance that we have and we need as long as the market is going to remain tight for the next maybe 2 years, 2-3 years. It's a good thing to have, I think.
Okay, nice. And if there is something we would improve, and I'm looking at all panelists. Franziska already said maybe the 50% related to the burden sharing is too high. Anything else you see as a possible improvement to this emergency measure?
It's a tricky question. Franziska, sorry, you were about to speak. No, go ahead.
Go ahead, ANUK. Go ahead.
No, please. You've done more work than me on that topic, so please do.
Not necessarily, but let's see. I think the what we really need to look at is where was the problem, and the problem was the very low storage filling levels at the end of the winter 2021-2022. So these minimum filling levels required, I think that is a good thing that we probably need to sort of continue having. Maybe not with the very high levels that we have, at least in the German version of the regulation, where we have 90 or I think even 95% in November. So that's a bit beyond any commercial rationality to require that, but well above the 20% or so that we saw in some of the Gazprom owned assets in the winter 2021-2022. That is very important.
Okay, thank you. Anything else you want to add, ANUK or Oliver, on this one?
No, probably just a more gradual replenishment or gradual targets might help for the market not to have the spikes that we've seen last year, but that's just one suggestion.
Okay, great. Marzia, before we go to the next topic, do you still want to say something? Because I think Italy has these strategic reserves, right? So is the rationale to have them in Italy maybe different from the rest of Europe, or?
I think it's mostly due to the to what Oliver and ANUK referred to, the insurance value of storage, just to be prepared in case of any high impact, low probability happens once in a lifetime. That what do you do? Then you have that in place and you can use it. And so it's the volume are set by the government each year, so it's a state managed procedure. So yeah. Okay, great. We're very disciplined. Huh? We have exactly 20 minutes for topic 2, so we have 20 minutes left for the last one. And I think also on the last one, there were a lot of things circulating all around. People have strong opinions on that. No, what happened to gas demand? Was it gas saving? Was it gas destruction? Was it just a cold winter? So please, Marzia, introduce the topic to us, and then we can discuss it again. Okay. Yes, so here is Regulation 1369 of 2022 of demand reduction measure to reduce gas use in Europe. So the idea behind it is what we save in summer we can use it in winter. The new regulation sets a target for all member states to reduce their gas demand by 15% compared to their average gas consumption from August 22 to March 2023. And it can be achieved by focusing on industry, although this percentage is going to impact all consumers, public administration, public building, households, power suppliers, and industry. It is a voluntary reduction. To reach that target, the regulation outlines various measures that can encourage to decrease gas demand. It also introduced an emergency tool, which is the possibility by the Commission to declare a union alert on security of supply. So this can be by its own initiative or following the request by at least 3 member states. This alert allows for a mandatory demand reduction target to be introduced. So it is imposing a mandatory reduction on all member states. But there are some exceptions, on this. So for instance, those member states that are not directly interconnected to a gas interconnected system of any other member states could be exempted, and there are other cases, but mostly is a mandatory target. And then what the Commission also adopted is a European gas demand reduction plan, which sets out measures, principles, and criteria for a coordinated demand reduction. It aims at safeguarding households and essential users, and it focuses on the substitution of gas with other fuels and overall energy savings in all sectors. The regulation entered into force in August 2022 for a period of 1 year, and a couple of weeks ago it has been put forward a proposal for this regulation to be extended for 1 additional year. So here again is the poll on saving regulation. Again, should we keep it? Should we improve it, or forget about it? I don't know if Chiara can. Okay, thank you.
And of course, we will send the results to Brussels immediately after the webinar, expecting that this will be implemented in the next few days.
Of course.
So think twice about what you answer.
I would like to see things not being implemented after only 2 days, but rather a bit slower pace right now.
Well, it's an emergency amendment for an emergency measure, Oliver. I mean, you need to.
Okay, so there are mixed feelings about these polls. So we are divided between keep it and drop it, with a good percentage also on improve it. So let's see again what academics have to say about it. So before we decide if we want to keep it, change or drop it, although we haven't tested the usefulness of the regulation to its full extent, because we didn't go into the union alert, but we need to be careful because it has been a mild winter, and also thanks to the fact that we had a very soft price cap, prices played a big role in reducing demand. So we need to distinguish between the effect of all of these variables and what actually happened. So this is what Oliver did in his research. So he used econometrics to filter out the effects of the climate and of economic activities, and to re-identify the real savings with a more correct counterfactual. And in a bit, he's going to be explaining his research to us with a bit of more detail. But also there has been other authors that suggested that we should subsidize savings, and we are also going to take a look at their research. So if Oliver, you want to jump in here and give us an overlook of what you have found.
Yes, I'm happy to do so. And yeah, first of all, as you can see here in this chart and also in the first numbers, we are distinguishing different consumer groups, which you already mentioned in your introduction, where their households are very different from industry. And then we have the power sector, and that's what we are disentangling here. And then we're calculating based on what we can observe before the crisis, and based on controlling for temperature in a way which is actually which we got from the industry standard load profiles, which are used on a daily basis in the industry. We fit that to the historic time series, and we find that we can very well explain the past. And now here we are then comparing our extension of that, our prediction based on that model, to what we can actually observe. So here can in black that's observed, and red that's our prediction, and we can see that let's start with industry in the middle, that already before the invasion of Ukraine, when everybody talked about saving natural gas, even before that, industry started to reduce natural gas. We looked a bit deeper into what caused this, or what was behind this, and we could see that there are certain industries relying heavily on natural gas, like ammonia industry, which were substituting like getting ammonia as imports from other countries, and then still downstream production was running, so we didn't lose, not all the economy collapsed, but we could somehow, even though there's an economic stress in the system, we could somehow move on, and over time this increased. So either it's prices or industry learning about more solutions, new contracts being adopted for the new prices, maybe purchasing some energy intensive goods from elsewhere, but still creating most the value as much as we can here in Europe. Then moving to the left, the small consumers, we see something in February and March, and we updated this in an ongoing basis. So when we first saw this, we were like, can we trust our model? And then over summer, reductions aren't so large at all, but also the potential to reduce is not as large. So here you can really see the heating that's causing this seasonality here in the data. But now actually we're finalizing our next update, which extends until December. And there we can see that since the beginning of this winter, every month there has been a substantial saving by small consumers. In power sector is a bit difficult to explain. Also here we do not control for temperature because there's so much driving it, like the availability of renewables. We had a drought, we had French nuclears being down. So there's still, given the stress in the European system, we could save some natural gas. I think that's mostly coal getting back online in Germany, etc. But what is not here on the slide is like what caused this, and I think that's now relating to where do we see further research, and also working on further research is what caused this. Of course, we actually show in our paper there's a correlation with prices, and that's quite natural to say, well, prices are at least one driver, or what we know from economics, behavioral economics for households, but also thinking of industries optimizing their profit. Then we can quite confidently say that prices are one reason. But what about public communication? We haven't seen a period like this, where everybody talks about natural gas savings and about how can this be done. So disentangling this, like, are only those people that get price changes, because in Germany it's not every month that prices change, but rather once in a year. Do only those that see the price change react to this price change, or is it also from reading in the media, from knowing that we are under a stressful situation, from being from a feeling of solidarity within Europe or with Ukraine? Is that causing part of it? And I think that's what I'm looking forward to see more research on.
Thank you, Oliver. Very insightful. I think we will be able to comment on it a bit more later. I'm sure there's going to be questions. Here, what is what other academics propose. So is Neuhoff. One was says that we should combine saving measures, and he proposes a specific type of gas saving measure, namely to do auctions or tenders or subsidize people to save gas. So coordinating different measures together to achieve better savings. So I think with this, I have concluded. And now I am going back.
Thank you, Marcia. So let's go first maybe to ANUK. I should mention that her research focus is energy demand and the energy transition. So I'm sure she will have something to say. Also, let me already mention that there are two comments on the chat that maybe one of our panelists can pick up. So one is, if we would extend the gas demand reduction emergency measure, and it says minus 15%, is that then minus 15% on top of the 15% we already achieved last winter? Or is it just still referring to the original baseline? That's a nice question. And then the other question is, I think already answered partly by Marcia. So, you know, because the question is this not contradictory, subsidizing demand, while at the same time trying to reduce demand? So I think Marcia already clarified, right? The concept could be to pay people not to use gas, right? So it's a different type of subsidy. It's not helping you to consume gas cheaply. It's actually paying you off not to use it, right? Kind of, that's what I understood. ANUK, please.
So just first answer the first question. It's 15% reduction compared to the 5-year average. So it's the same rule as we had for this winter that is going to be applied for next winter. So it's not on top of, it's still compared to the previous 5 years average. I was very surprised by the reply of the poll. 38% to drop the measures on demand, and that's surprising to me. That for me, that's the first thing that should actually do. We have no control on the supply. We've talked about the prices problem. One thing we have control as an importer is the demand side. So for me, that would be the first stop. Try and control demand, especially looking at the fundamentals that we're looking at for 2023, which at the moment point towards an increase in gas demand in Europe, in all three of the main consuming sectors, whether the industry, the residential and commercial, in other words, the heating needs, or the generation sector. I'm very happy to go into detail, but I'm mindful about the timing, so I'm not going to do that now, but if you want, I can. But just looking at the fundamentals and the very likely, increase in gas demand, if we drop the one tool that we have to try and manage the crisis we're in, I'm really thoughtful about what could we do that would help. For me, managing gas demand is really the first thing that we should be doing. And we have been very successful, although as mentioned by Oliver, we've also been very lucky as well. Probably about a third of our demand reduction in 2022 was due to warm temperatures at the beginning and at the end of the year. So we have to remind ourselves about that. We have been lucky. we may not be as lucky next time. And again, with lower gas prices, gas demand is going to go up. The nuclear generation in France is looking better, but only mildly better. So bear in mind that we're not out of the wood just yet for this winter.
Thank you, ANUK. And you have a supporter in the chat. Anna said exactly. That was surprising, this vote. So, but please, the ones that surprised us, give us your arguments. Don't hesitate to put them in the chat so we include them in the discussion. Who wants to go next? I'm looking at Franziska or Oliver.
Let me maybe also provide a couple of arguments. I think why some people are actually more critical of this provision is that we are really talking about a long-term influence on demand that governments are trying to exert. And while in the past, we had always defined crisis as something that lasts a week or maybe two. So out of a sudden, we really want to sort of fundamentally influence demand. And that's, that's really a new feature. What I think is helpful with the with this, but also with the sort of the rest of the set of regulations that we look at today, is that we finally spell out a little better what supply security means and what emergency measures are. I mean, we were all surprised at the beginning of the crisis that we didn't actually know how these actions that were sort of fluffily mentioned in supply security directive and also in the national provisions would spell out. I mean, the German regulator only started in the summer 2021 to look at, well, what would actually be the facilities to disconnect in case of a what we call Gasmangellage, of a reduction, a substantial reduction of gas flows, and I think a lot of people, including me, expected that to be known. And so these kind of these additional provisions that we now have, at least they helped us having a clearer picture of what would be tools in a real emergency situation, which we haven't had so far. So I think in that sense they were helpful, but now we are really talking about the long-term crisis, probably 2 or 3 years. And I understand that people are more hesitant to say, let's keep or let's drop market-based measures and go for heavily regulated measures. Maybe let's leave it here and let's see what Oliver says.
Go ahead, Oliver. Thank you, Francisco.
Maybe I take the last minute or so. Maybe for adding research questions, to me, it's not entirely sure. I mentioned the why is demand reduced, but also how. Yes, we know some anecdotes here and there, and we know that turning down the thermostat is reducing heating demand, that importing something from elsewhere. But is it really demand destruction, as you mentioned in the beginning, Leonardo? So will demand come back? Yes, there are some forecasts of demand going upwards in Europe, but to me, I think these forecasts are also uncertain, because it's not, at least to me, and like speaking of academic papers that I know of, I haven't seen this analysis, and I think it's also too quick. So there's much more research to be done on that. To say, well, how much of this reduction will last? Plus, then we have more like short-term measures with long-term impact, and then we have these more long-term measures like installing heat pumps. There is a ramp up in this market, and that will help us next winter, maybe a bit. But then looking forward, I think that's the way where we need to go for the crisis, but also for the climate, of course.
Yeah, and something I'm also personally interested in is to know to what extent these emergency measures will be replaced by maybe a gas market reform, or because that's exactly what happened in electricity, right? There is now a proposal on the table, and the idea is that that proposal will sort of replace fully, or at least partly, the emergency measures. So yeah. We seem to agree that we need to work more on this topic, right? Not only as academics, but also as policymakers. So I think, Marcia, just in case you wanted it, you have the blessing of the whole group here, and also already an audience that is probably looking forward when we have some more research to then also bring it to the debate.
I would love that.
Great. And then I hope we can connect again with the experts we had here today. It was really nice to have you here. Thanks for coming, and hope to reconnect with you. And I'm always learning a lot on gas, I must say, as originally more of an electricity researcher, but I think today everything is so integrated that you cannot anymore work in isolation on one sector topic, right? So it's even more interesting than in the past to try to look at all these interactions between systems. Thank you.
Thank you.